So we'll let people pile in. Just take a couple more minutes. All right. Good evening. Welcome, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for our presentation on the Wind River High Route with Mountain Shop's very own ultralight backpacking guru, Gary Lawton. I'm Jess Joyner with Mountain Shop, and I'm excited to host Gary. He's going to share his journey on the route, his ultralight gear basics, food, shelter, daily mileage, and the best time of year to make the journey possible. If questions come up, you can go ahead and type them in the chat and we'll answer them at the end. If there's anything urgent or like really poignant that you want answered, you can type that into the chat as well. And we'll get to that. And with that, I'll pass things over to Gary. Welcome, Gary.
Thank you, Jess. Hello, everyone. Hope you can hear me okay. This is my first webinar, so let's do this. This should be fun. Should be fun for me. I hope it's fun for you. Usually when I've done this clinic or something like this, I take a little survey of, who's planning on doing this and who's done what. A little harder to do with a webinar, but I assume that a lot of you are planning on doing it this year, next year, in the near future. And you're here to get some more information or just to get excited about doing an amazing route. For any of you who have been to the Wind River Range, you already have a taste of what you're in for. For those of you who have done maybe in the Sierras, or maybe some of you have done parts or all of the Sierra High Route, they're similar in some ways, they're different in other ways. So if you have experience in the Sierras on that high route, then you're going to do fine on the Wind River High Route. I've done probably 40% of the Sierra High Route. Fabulous route also for the part that I did. I found it to be a little bit harder in that few more boulders, a lot more boulder hopping, a lot more talus than the Wind River. Wind River does have some of that, as you'll see, but on a lesser scale and not quite as much every day, all day, like it seemed like the Sierra route was. So anyway, I hope that gives you a little bit of an idea. Let's see. There we go. Okay, so I began with the slide. I'll just read it. You can read along with me. I became less and less concerned with the mastery of technical difficulty or even the ascent of individual peaks, but more and more absorbed in the problems and delights of movement over wide areas of mountain country. Eric Shipton was that quote, and Eric Shipton was a early to mid 1900s, I think British explorer. He explored all over the world, but I think he's known for exploring like the Karakoram and the Himalaya. I put this quote in there. It's been a favorite quote of mine for years and years. A little about myself, my history. I'm from North Carolina. I've been a Oregonian for 30 years, but I was born in North Carolina. That's the accent you probably hear that most people pick up on. I learned to backpack there. I learned to rock climb in North Carolina, excellent rock climbing. Moved to Alaska for about 3 years and learned to mountaineer and ice climb and more technical, bigger mountain stuff, as well as more rock climbing. Moved to Oregon in 1990 and continued mountaineering, things like that. In my later years, I've kind of come full circle, become a backpacker again. In the last, since 2012, I became a long distance hiker. So I've I've hiked the Triple Crown, the PCT, the EDT, the Continental Divide, the Appalachian Trail, and then also the Pacific Northwest Trail, a little lesser known. But just to give you an idea of my background, but I've kind of come full circle. And during this journey of being in the mountains and the outdoors, this quote's always spoken to me. And I put it in this presentation because the Wind River just to me screams, traveling through a wide variety of country and just beautiful alpine mountain scenery. So that's why I put that quote in. So the Wind River High Route. So what about it? It's 80 miles. As you can see, it's about 80 miles. It's about 60% off trail. So 48, 49, 50 miles, somewhere that off trail. Now some of that off trail will be like, little footpaths that disappear, things like that. But still, a lot of it's pretty rugged off trail. You're kind of doing your own thing. There are 9 passes. The main passes on the route are between 11,500 feet and 12,200 feet. So you're up there for a week. I'll think a little bit more about that. There's one glacier, as you can see here on this photo, Knife Point Glacier. There's one actual glacier that you cross. As you can see, it's not super technical, it's low angle. I'll talk more about that. The trip that I did in 2018, we did 7 days, which you can see is an average of 11.4 miles per day. So for myself, being a thru hiker, that sounds pretty easy. I'm used to being on a long distance hike and doing, between 20 and 30 miles every day. So 11.4 is like, oh, that's a piece of cake. Well, as you can see, when we go through, some days 11 wasn't too bad. Some days didn't make 11 miles. So we'll talk about that as I go through. All right. So I want to just give you a little resource information. These are resources that me and my partners used. Adventure Allen is a good website. That's where you're going to get a lot of information. That's where you're going to be able to print out maps with the route on there. He has excellent information about route and gear planning. So anything I don't touch on, he hits on even in more detail. I mean, there's pages and pages to that website. So we're going to try to keep this down to a minimal, little bit less time. So I may not hit all the detail that he does, but there'll be time for questions at the end. Other mapping, some of you like me might use Gaia GPS on your phone, on a phone app. I certainly do that. I put CalTopo down there. That's not a resource I usually use, but my partner Brad uses that. He created our route by using, he used CalTopo and he printed maps from there, and he used information from Alan's website, like the dotted line on his map to create a route. He shared that with me as a GPX file, and I put it into Gaia. So I had the route on Gaia, and I had paper maps like the one you see here. Best time of year, like as I say there, mid-August to mid-September. Our trip 3 years ago was, I think it was like the second week of September, so that right at the end of the season. We had spectacular weather. I'll talk a little bit more about weather as we go. But the reason I say mid-August is it would certainly be doable in July, certainly mid-July, late July, early August. The reason I say mid-August more than anything is there will be less snow, but more than anything, less mosquitoes. When I did the Continental Divide Trail, I went through the Wind River Range in early August, which you would think, mosquitoes won't be too bad. They were horrendous. So I think the general consensus on most years in the Wind River Range is mid-August, they're at least, if there are any bugs, they're not going to be too bad. And, early August on some years might not be too bad. But certainly more snow, depending on the year. So depending on your taste, do you want to travel on snow more, which can be easier, can be harder, depending on your experience and comfort level. So we chose late September mainly because that was the time frame that worked for all of us. But it turned out to be a really good time. The weather was a little bit more stable, though the Wind River Range is noted for unstable weather. So at the bottom of the screen, you'll see Alternative Route by Andrew Skirka. There is a much longer version of the Wind River High Route. It's about 20 or 30 miles longer, I believe. Andrew adds length to each end of the route, and then the route along where we were going is somewhat different also. He goes over some passes that the Allen Dixon route does not. Yeah, I remember going down a valley one day, and my friend Brad pointed up at a pass that we were going underneath but not going up, and he was saying, I believe the Andrew Skirka route goes over that pass. And I just remember looking at that pass and thinking, no, thank you. It looked ridiculously hard, like class 4 loose screed, like did not look fun. So I personally found the Allen Dixon route to be very, very enjoyable. Some more info, and I'll have this stuff. If you don't have time to write things down, I will at the very end, the final screen will have all of this written information on there. So if you don't get it, don't worry about it. You'll have a chance at the end. Great Outdoor Transportation Company is a shuttle service. There's their website, phone number, email. I checked it just recently. This seems to be up to date for the year. It's expensive. It's just a point-to-point hike, and it's a lot of dirt roads, especially going into Big Sandy. It's a big shuttle. I believe, I haven't checked lately, but I believe it's in the neighborhood of $300 to $400. And what that will do is you can drive to Green River, park your car, arrange for them to pick it up and move it to Big Sandy. And it's quite the adventure for them. So $300 to $400 sounds expensive, and it is a lot of money. But if that's the only way you can do it, it is well worth it. So I recommend them. On our trip, long story short, we were able to shuttle ourselves. I drove from here. My friends flew from the East Coast, had a rental car. We'll talk more about that. But we were able to shuttle ourselves, so we did not use this service. But I hear they do a great job, and if you need a shuttle, they're the folks to go to. Little bit about, we'll get into some gear and stuff, and I want to leave plenty of time to just talk about the route, so I'm not going to go a ton into gear, but I do want to talk about it. These are some things that I've pictured here and listed that are additions for the most part to your typical backpack. I don't usually use an Ursack. I use an Ursack personally when I'm in grizzly country, especially in places where I can't hang my food. I will use an Ursack. That's a bear resistant bag. I'll carry bear spray. Some people carry bear spray everywhere, and that's fine. I do what makes you feel comfortable. I rarely, if ever, carry bear spray outside of grizzly country. And even in grizzly country, I realize it's, it might not be foolproof, but it's like the best protection I think you can have for that encounter that you tried to avoid but couldn't. So that's an added weight. Micro spikes for the glacier, and ice axe, which I don't believe in late September we ended up taking ice axe and did not need one. Earlier season, you might, so that's going to add to your weight. And then you can see I used a 10-degree bag because that's what I had at the time. I had a 10-degree and a 30-degree, and I wanted to make sure I slept warm after a long, hard day. So I took my 10-degree. I now have a 20-degree quilt that when I go back to the Wind River in late August, early September, I'm going to take it, and I think it'll be fine. Even on the trip we did, I think a 20-degree quilt or sleeping bag, a little bit lighter, would be fine. So we talked about this trip being an ultralight trip. So if there's any like true ultralighters out there, you'll look and see 14.5 base weight. That's not really ultralight. Well, we're adding in all of these things that you wouldn't normally take in your base weight on a normal backpacking trip. So I'll just talk briefly about pat the condition, pat for the conditions. So it's a phrase I first heard from Andrew Skirka. Uses that phrase a lot. So Andrew Skirka is a light hiker, ultralight hiker, but I've heard him talk exclusively about pat for the conditions. So yes, you want to go light, and I'm here to encourage you if you're doing the Wind River High Route, definitely try to go light. Your goal, in my opinion, should be under 30 pounds. Going back to that last, you can see my total pack weight was 29 pounds with a 14.5 pound base weight. We'll talk about the rest of that, where the rest of that weight came from coming up. But packing for the conditions, the Wind River Range can throw everything at you. We had amazingly good weather. Cold at night, reasonably warm. It's been 3 years. I honestly don't remember the exact temperatures, but I remember, 50s, 60s, maybe even 70 on warm days. But the name of the range is the Wind River Range, the key word being wind. So the wind does blow often, especially in the afternoon. Every day for 7 days, there would be strong winds from middle of the day till late afternoon. Fortunately, our campsites were fairly calm. By the time it got dark, the wind would die. When I went through there on the CDT, got everything. We had a 40-some degree rainy day in early August. So that gives you some idea of what can happen. If you go in September, it could snow. I've talked to other people who have gotten a foot of snow in early September or late August. So you've got to pack for the conditions. So go light, but pack what you feel comfortable taking that will help you be reasonably comfortable, but more importantly, safe in a variety of high mountain weather and situations. So like you see here, I took a light down jacket and good rain gear, a fairly lightweight pack I'm going to talk about, a 10-degree bag, which going back this year, I will take a little lighter bag, a 20-degree quilt. That's literally like a half a pound lighter than my 10-degree mummy bag. So significant weight savings there. But pack light, but pack safe. Got plenty of time to practice if you're going this year. So that was 3 years ago. When I go back in late August, I hope we're going to do like a loop hike, which is going to include about 40 miles, I think, or so of the Wind River Range. I haven't expressly looked at the route we're doing this year yet, but it'll be a similar trip, except instead of a shuttle, we're going to do a loop. And we're leaving late August through like right before Labor Day. So I'm changing up a little things. There's my quilt. I'm lightening up that. A couple other things might be a little bit lighter, but I think my pack weight and food and all that's going to be pretty similar. 28, 29, less than 30 pounds would be a goal, I would say, shoot for. All right, and gear starts with your backpack, but I encourage people, if you're looking for a new backpack or you have a backpack, you just want as light a pack as you can that will comfortably carry 30 pounds. So, if you're planning on carrying 35 or 40 pounds, like one of these lighter packs like pictured here might not be the best choice. I find like the Six Moons Minimalist, the Gossamer Gear Gorilla, they'll do okay at 35. My personal favorite pack is Hyperlight, but over 30 pounds, they just start to get less comfortable. They're just more on your shoulders. There's less suspension. They're lighter packs, and a lighter pack, the philosophy there is you have a lighter pack because you're carrying less and lighter gear. So like I said, I would encourage 30 pounds or less if you feel like you can do that safely. And part of that weight savings can be using a lighter pack. On my trip 3 years ago, I used the Gorilla, and it did great. I love the simplicity of Hyperlight. I've got a lot of miles through hiking with Hyperlight, so it's just well worn to my back, and I think I'm a little bit more used to Hyperlight, just the way it carries, because I do have literally thousands of miles through hiking with Hyperlight. But Gossamer Gear at that 30-pound weight, for some people, especially if you're not used to lightweight packs, the Gossamer gear and the 6 Moons might carry that weight a little bit more comfortably. So those are just some examples that we carry here at the shop. So I've got to promote the shop a little bit. So we carry all those brands here. As far as shelters, I encourage there another one of the big three. The big three are your sleep system, your shelter, and your pack. So your shelter can be one of those places that you shave a lot of weight. You can see both of these shelters that I use on various trips are very light. I've got a lot of miles using them, especially the 6 Moons. I have done 2 through hikes with that setup. So I've got a lot of experience with it. And so I've kind of learned through experience what I can, for lack of a better way of putting it, what I can get away with in the high mountains with an ultralight shelter. You know, these shelters are designed for 3-season backpacking. So beware at, 11,000 feet using an ultralight shelter. Get familiar with it. So take as light a shelter as you're comfortable spending time in foul weather at 11,000 feet. And that's going to be different for different people, whatever your comfort level is, whatever your experience level is. My experience with these 2 shelters, I've got enough experience that I feel comfortable. Is there a little risk with an ultralight shelter at 11,000 feet? Sure. But with experience, I feel like you can do it relatively safely. I used the Gossamer gear, the one last time. It did great. Even in the wind, fortunately, again, at night, it was fairly calm. But it did great. I'm probably going to take my tried and true 6 Moons this time. It is a little bit lighter, and every ounce counts. I do think it's a little bit better in the wind, especially if you set it lower to the ground. I may leave that inner tent at home just because I'm thinking in late August the bugs aren't going to be bad enough. I might just take the shelter and save about 10 ounces off that tarp weighs 8 ounces. That is a Dyneema shelter, the 6 Moons. But the moral is, on those things, just go as light as you're comfortable going, because your pack, your shelter, and your sleep system are going to be the places that you can lose the most weight in your pack. But never sacrifice your safety. A little talking about food. We did a 7-day trip, 6 nights. I think my food bag was about 11.5 pounds. I haven't done the math in my head, but it's a little less than 2 pounds a day, obviously. And I had enough food. My cohort, Brad, came straight from Tennessee, flew into Salt Lake, drove. The next day we went to 10,000 feet. He was feeling the altitude a little bit. So the first 3 days, he didn't eat a whole lot. At the end of a 7-day trip, I had about a half a day's food left. He had about 2 days food left. So I'll talk more about acclimatizing for the altitude. But I personally use the Ursac Major XL. And I was able to get 7 days of food in there, barely. We're doing 8 days this year, and I'm going to have to figure out how to get an extra day of food in there. It's going to be really tight, but I'm going to give it my best shot. I always line my Ursac with the OpSat odor-proof bags. We sell them here at the shop. You can get them online. They're an odor-proof. They say odor-proof. They're very odor-resistant. I've been using them for years. Even when I don't use my Ursac, whenever I backpack, I use the OpSat odor-proof bags. There's some evidence to say they're not foolproof, but from my experience, they help a lot with keeping the smells down for bears, for other critters. You might hear me knock on wood there. I'm gonna knock on wood and say I haven't even had mice find my bag when it's not necessarily hung like technically I should tell you you should. I don't always hang my bag if I'm not in dangerous bear country. And so far, the OpSat bags have worked for me. So I hope I didn't jinx myself by saying that. On the last trip, I personally used a jet boil for a stove. I took a 4-ounce canister. As you can see, I only used 3 ounces in 6 nights. That was 6 dinners, 6 breakfasts. Very efficient fuel. I love the jet boil. I'm going to talk a little bit more about stoves here in a minute. Water, it's like the Sierra. For anybody who's been to the Wind River or the Sierra, on most years, there's water everywhere. There's plenty of water. 2-liter capacity is probably plenty. I think Brad had 2. Gatorade bottles is what he uses. He uses Aquamira and Gatorade bottles. I use the Hoser 2 from Platypus and an inline filter. So I have a 2-liter of those, and then I think I had like a 1-liter bottle. 3 liters might be handy if you're going up over a pass that there might not be water on, and maybe you're going to dry camp before you get all the way down the other side. 3 liters would be excessive, but plenty. You could do it with 2. One of the joys of some of these high mountain ranges is water's not a problem like it can be in some places. Just a little about stoves. The main thing with stoves that I would recommend is you want efficiency. And that's why on big, long trips, and a lot of my through hikes, I've used Jetboil. They're a little heavier. They're not technically ultralight, but they're super efficient. So I know from my experience how many days right down almost to the gram of fuel that I use. So for me, I knew using a Jetboil that a 4-ounce canister of fuel would easily do a week-long trip. I wasn't so sure on the BRS, which is what Brad uses, or I have the Oli Camp, which is very similar stove. Ultralight, 1.5 ounce stove. That pot and stove you see in the middle there weighs about 5 ounces or so total, versus the burner and pot for Jetboil is like 11 or 12 ounces. But I find the Oli Camp and the BRS, I love them for backpacking. They're super light. I use those a lot when I'm ultralight backpacking, but they're not good in the wind, and it's the Wind River range. Brad did fine. He only cooked in the evening. He did not fire his stove in the morning. But there were lots of evenings where he had to really find a sheltered spot to be able to boil his 2 cups of water. I put the alcohol stove on there as an example of another super efficient stove, the Caldera Cone alcohol stove, super efficient. The reason we did not use alcohol, and the reason I use it less, is when there is fire restrictions, alcohol stoves are usually banned in most places. If you read the fine print, they're usually banned. When there's fire restrictions, you usually have to have a stove with an on-off switch, and that does not. But I do love it for the efficiency. So if for some miraculous reason you're going to the Wind River and the fire restrictions aren't in, then a good efficient alcohol stove can be an ultralight efficient way to go. A stove I'm playing with, and a pot I'm even starting to play with, is the MSR Pocket Rocket Deluxe. You can see on the lower right there, it's got the burner is a little bit more protected. It does, or the Soto Windmaster is another stove that has a similar burner. Doesn't mean you can be in the wind. It just means that the lightest little breeze doesn't affect it like it does like BRS or the Ion. But I'm starting to play with that even a little bit with that Oli Camp XTS pot. It's not the lightest pot at 7 plus almost 8 ounces. But if you look carefully at the bottom, it kind of has a built-in windscreen similar to Jetboil. It's not a unit, doesn't snap onto the stove, but I'm finding in preliminary test, it's fairly efficient and it cuts the boil time 15 or 20%. So it's pretty efficient. So I'm thinking of maybe trying that on some longer trips. It might be efficient enough, for that efficiency that I want. And by being that efficient, I can take 1 small canister of fuel instead of a big one or 2 small ones, which just adds weight to my pack. I love to be able to only carry 1 small canister. So I always play with ways of being able to do that, because if I can do that in the long run, it's a little bit lighter. So this pot and stove would be about 1 ounce or so lighter, 1 or 2 ounces lighter than Jetboil. So if it even approaches the efficiency, that might be my next like high mountain, long distance stove setup. Stay tuned on that one. I mentioned acclimatization. So we're going to kind of get into like getting into the trip now. We've talked a little bit about gear. Hopefully, if any questions came up there, you put them in the chat and we can talk
Gary,
about
do you
them.
want to answer some of the gear questions before we move
Um,
on?
yeah, I think we're doing okay on time. Yeah, I can maybe take a couple and try to get the rest later.
Yeah. Okay. So I noticed, this is a question. I noticed that you replaced the stock Jetboil lid with some foil. Is that for
Yes,
weight savings and possible additional heat retention, or is there some other reason?
both. I'm always trying to get lighter, and even though that's a heavier stove, that literally, I can't remember the exact weight, but the foil versus the regular lid saved a half an ounce. Now, there's probably people laughing right now, and that's totally fine. I laugh at myself sometime, but a half an ounce is a half an ounce. But yes, at the same time, you hit the nail on the head. I think it keeps the heat in a little bit. That cozy on that pot. So if I have a meal that that has to simmer for a few minutes, I can usually bring it to a boil, add the meal, stir, turn the stove off, cap it, and that cozy and that lid will usually, I can save fuel. I don't have to simmer things. I try to never have a meal that takes more than just a few minutes of simmering, and I find that that works. Also, let's see, going back, if you look on this screen, you see the Reflectix cozy on my titanium pot there. A cozy on your pot, kind of the same thing. You just kind of make a cozy out of Reflectix. You can get that at Lowe's or Home Depot or Amazon. I got a big roll for various projects. It's used to insulate like HVAC stuff, I think, but ultralighters use it to insulate all kinds of stuff. So I hope that answered that question. Was there another question related to gear?
Yeah. Someone would like a recommendation on a good tent for a tall person.
Okay. I don't have a picture of one, but yes, if you're over 6'1", 6'2", perfect example, my coworker here at the shop, Steve, is 6'5". So that's tall. That's definitely, I'm 5'8", so I can fit in, I'm 5'8" on a good day. So I can fit in just about anything. Steve is 6'5". He personally uses the Six Moons Skyscape Trekker, which we sell here at the shop. We're a Six Moons dealer. I would invite you to come in and check that out. There's a couple or look at it on their website. There's a couple of different models. There's the Skyscape Trekker, which is a seal poly, a siliconized material. So that's 28 ounces. And then they make another heavier, less expensive version, same size, same cut, same features, just for 40 ounces. So a little bit more economy version. So the Trekker is the one I'd recommend because at 28 ounces, it's not super, super light, but when you see how much room it has, so it has a lot of room, especially for tall folks. So personally, I'm sure there's others out there, but the ones that I've been working with here at the shop and the ones I've had experience with, that Skyscape Trekker, if you're over 6 feet, or especially if you're in that 6'2" and taller, the Skyscape Trekker from Six Moon Designs, I would highly recommend looking at. Is that
Another
good?
question.
Sure.
Let's see. These are sort of gear related. Someone's curious if there are bear concerns in the Wind River.
Okay. Yes, yeah. And I mentioned Ursack, and I think I said grizzly, but I didn't really talk about the bears. There are grizzly bears in the Wind River. From what I've read and heard, I mean, there really haven't been a problem. It's wilderness area. It's high mountain. It's not like like Glacier National Park, Yellowstone they have higher concentrations because they're more protected. They're national parks. And those protected bears, they're more numerous, they're more habituated to people, which means people get a little bit closer. Those bears scare me personally a little bit more than like the Wind River bears. I haven't seen one there in the 2 or 3 times I've been there, but they are there. So, black bears, I certainly don't want to take them lightly because a black bear encounter can be serious, but The grizzly bear encounters, if you had one, obviously would be much more serious. It's just it's a bad situation if you have an encounter with a grizzly, or it can be. So you want to mitigate that. There are bears. I'm sure there's black bears too. When we did the high route in September, I honestly don't even remember seeing scat in the high country. Didn't see any bears, didn't even see a black bear, but they are there. So I would take your normal bear precautions. On the approach, if there's trees, hang your food. Even with the earth sack, hang your food. Be safe with your food, hang it out of camp. With grizzly bears, using the earth sack, you've got some protection from losing your food there, hopefully. The other thing for protecting your food is it also protects the bears. So because a bear, and just my public service announcement, any bear that gets into human food, they're probably going to do it again. And that ultimately gets that bear into trouble. And it can make that bear more dangerous because now they see humans as a source of food, and that gets them closer and can lead to encounters. So that's my bear spiel, but I hope I'm answering your question. But yes, there are bears, there are grizzly bears. So you treat it as such. Your food cannot be in camp. We tended to camp a ways away from our shelters, not near, certainly not cooking in our tents, which I will admit I do sometimes if I feel like it's relatively safe. But in grizzly country, never. I will always cook away from my tent. I'll always keep my food away from my tent. That picture I showed of the earth sack, you're going to tie it to something if you can. There's nowhere to hang it. There's no trees high enough, but you can tie it to a tree. There were some sites where there weren't even trees big enough to tie our earth sacks to. So the thing you do there is you safely away from camp, you just lay your earth sack on the ground. There's really no known examples that I know of bears hauling them off. If they do try to get in them, they're going to paw around, they're going to try to get in, but it's not like they take them with them, and have a picnic later. They just don't do that. But your safest bet is to tie it to something, just in case, or to hang it. Look at ERSAC's website. They go into detail on what they recommend, how to use their product. So I hope that answers that question.
One more question.
Okay.
Someone's curious if, in your opinion, if an ice axe and micro spikes would be necessary in mid-August for this hot year.
That's a great question, and we're going at least a couple of weeks earlier, and I honestly have not looked in detail at the route. For us, and I'm going to talk about when we use microspikes. We only used microspikes once, and that was to cross the glacier because it was bare ice, and it was low angle, but it was bare ice, and microspikes just made it easier. We did not take an ice axe in mid-September because we knew that we were going to be able to scramble around any steeper snowfields. Now, there were some snowfields that if I had had an ice axe, I could have went down or maybe even glissaded or descended and saved some tedious boulder hopping. So you're going to get more of those in an average year, the earlier you go. So if you were, I think I would try to check conditions somehow, how big a year it was, but I would think in late August and earlier, mid-August, early August, I would take an ice axe and a microspikes. I might even take some lightweight crampons, some light aluminum crampons for earlier season. They're just going to have more purchase on snow than microspikes. And I think that could be fun, with mountaineering experience. I have a lot of mountaineering experience, in Alaska, and here my friend Brad did not. So we opted on a couple of snowfields that we could have descended. We didn't have ice axes, so I didn't feel comfortable doing it without an ice axe. And him not being a climber, we were able to go around. So it was a better time of year for us to go later. But I hope I'm answering your question. I think mid-August, unless it's a really low snow year and the snow has melted and maybe you've gotten some reports that you're able to go around things, around snowfields, I would probably take an ice axe. Because it's, if nothing else, it's going to speed things up. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, I think, on one of the slides. If not, please ask again at the end.
One last
Okay.
question, Gary. Is there a reason why you used an Ursack versus a bear canister?
Um, you know, for me, and this is a personal choice. My friend Brad, we're talking about this year, and he will use either one. For me personally, I choose an Ursack when I'm in grizzly country, places I can't hang. I'm in grizzly country, but hard side canisters are not required. For me personally, the only time I use a hard-sided canister is in a place where they're required, places in the Olympic mountain range, in national parks like Yellowstone, or Glacier, or the Sierra, where they're required. I will absolutely take one. You have to. I choose an Ursack for grizzly country instead of a hard-sided, because they're lighter and they're easier to pack. And I feel, and again, this is speaking for me, I feel safe doing that. You know, if the Wind River range was a place where there were a lot of reports of bears being habituated, black bears even, and they're coming into camps and stuff, I would take a hard-sided. That's your best protection, absolutely. And if that makes you sleep better, take a hard-sided canister. You should take one or the other, in my opinion, in grizzly country. But I hope that answers. That's why I choose the Ursack. It protects me. I feel like it protects the bears from getting habituated, and it's just lighter and easier to pack. And currently, hard-sided canisters are not the law. They're not required in the Wind River range. So that's why.
Thanks, Gary.
Okay.
There's one more question, but I think let's just move on and we can answer
Okay.
it towards the end.
And if I don't get to it, please, I'll stay at the end, you know, for a reasonable amount of time. All right. So let's see. Let me get back. I think I was at the acclimatization thing, right? I think that's where I left off.
Yep.
So just briefly on acclimatization. So on day one, you're going to climb over 10,000 feet, and you're not going to come under 10,000 feet until day 7 on a 7-day trip like we did. So you're going to be above 10,000 feet for 5, almost 6 days, quite often above 11,000 feet. As I said earlier, all the passes, most of the first 2 passes on trail are over 10,000. But the rest of the passes for the rest of the high route are 11.5 to 12.2. So you're up there. So again, speaking for myself, I acclimatize really well, but very slowly in my, compared to climbing partners I've had. So if I were to go to 10,000 feet, if I were to drive to the Wind River today and go to 10,000 feet tomorrow, I would almost guarantee the next morning I would wake up feeling so bad. And for me, that's like nausea, upset stomach, can't eat. I don't tend to get the headaches that are associated with altitude as much, but for me, it's just stomach illness. And then I can't eat, I can't drink, and it just spirals from there. So it takes me some time to get used to altitude. And once I do, I seem to do fine. I've never had serious illness, but I have definitely suffered at altitude before. I've climbed Denali, Mount McKinley, Denali, and the first attempt was an attempt, did not summit. And the altitude, brought me down to size. And the second time it did too, but I was a little bit more prepared. Things worked out a little bit better. But I would recommend acclimatizing. Now, my partners, I hope it was good natured, but they flew from East Coast, lower altitudes, came in, next day went to 10,000 feet. So it was tough on them, and they ribbed me a little bit about, well, you cheated, you acclimatized, but I encourage it. And I think they would if they could. just with time, with jobs and stuff. They're flying coast to coast. They didn't really have time other than sleeping at like 9,000 feet the night before. But I had the time. I'm fortunate that I have the time. So on this particular time, I literally had like 4 days. So I did a 4-day backpack and got up above 10,000 feet and moved very slowly, but acclimatized. It helped me get used to altitude so that when I jumped onto the Wind River Range up for the high route, I felt much better. It was still hard the first. It's still hard the whole way, right? You're at high altitude. It's hard work, but my body was more used to the altitude. So I recommend acclimatization if you can, even if it's just a day or two. Do a day hike or two. Sleep as high as you can. Camp at one of the high trailheads or something. Just anything you can do to get used to the altitude before you jump onto the route. And those first 2 or 3 days are going to be much easier for you and for most of us. My acclimatization hike, I went up onto the CDT and kind of hit this area that was kind of hard when I did the CDT in 2014. That upper left photo, the upper Jean Lake area, I had a very dear friend and fellow thru hiker get really ill right near where that photo is. And so a group of us had to help her out the next day. And then she got hypothermia because of all things. The next day was in the 40s and drizzly rain with some wind in August. So packing for the conditions. Remember I talked about that. So for me, I just wanted to acclimatize, but I left the Wind River Range thinking, oh my gosh, that mountain range just tried to kill my friend. And without going into that whole story, I mean, we were really worried for her for several hours that it's like, this is not good. She's hyperthermic. She's really ill. We can't get her to move fast enough. So part of it too was me going back into this area and just kind of making peace. For me, that's just me. If this sounds kind of hokey, that's fine. But for me, I went in and acclimatized, but just revisited this area, obviously in much better weather. And so I felt not only physically ready, acclimatization wise, but like even mentally, emotionally ready to tackle this route, after my prior experience with being in the range and having that experience of a sick friend. So it was a double-edged sword for me to get back in there and have a great 4-day backpack and get ready for an even bigger adventure. And let's let the adventure begin. Start, most people go north to south, so southbound. I don't know why everybody goes that way, but everybody does. Maybe it's because that's the way Alan Dixon and his friend mapped it out. I don't know. It's a good way to go. So Green River Trailhead. So the Green River, if that name sounds familiar, it should. The Green River Lakes, it should be Green River Lakes Trailhead. There's some lakes that the upper Green River flows into, and then the Green River flows out of the lakes. That's the start of the hike. And the Green River is a tributary. This is the headwaters, basically, of the Green River that is a tributary of the Colorado River. So for those of you who know that, down in desert of Utah, the Green River and the Colorado come together near Moab, Utah. This is basically the headwaters of the Green River. So I thought that was pretty cool. My friend Alan joined us there. He was supposed to be on the whole trip with me and Brad. But due to, and I won't go into a whole lot of detail there, but he had an injury just like not long before the trip, and just decided at the last minute, it just, he just didn't feel like it was a good idea. But he hiked in the first day, and as you'll see, meets us at the end. But a little about Alan. This would have been the first trip that Alan and I had done in like 30 years. Well, except he did meet me for 2 days when I did the Appalachian Trail, because he lives in North Carolina. But other than that, we hadn't done a trip, in decades. So it was really hard and disappointing. But he did the Appalachian Trail the summer he graduated from high school. oh gosh, I don't remember the year. And Alan, I don't know if you're listening or not. You can put it on chat if you're listening. But a long time ago, he's in his 50s now, I think, and he did it right out of high school. So a long time ago, and he instilled all those years ago, planted that seed for me to become a thru hiker decades later. So I thank him for instilling that in me. And then Brad, Alan and Brad had done bunches of trips together. I had never done a trip with Brad. I met Brad the night before this trip. So Brad, if you're listening, you've probably heard this story, but it was a little daunting. I'm getting ready to start this big trip in the high mountains with someone I've never done a trip with. But you know, he seemed cool. And as it turned out, he was very competent, experienced in the Wind River Range. And I trusted my friend Alan that he wasn't sending me out there with someone he wasn't. So here we are at the trailhead. You can see this coincides with the CDT there. The picture of me on the right there is a placard for the CDT. It shares the route here for a bit. So we started out at Green River Lakes. There's one of the lakes on the right, on the left-hand picture. So you're just hiking along the lakes. You'll see the mountains in the distance are kind of hazed in. And I think we all know what that is by now. There was some smoke from a fire pretty far away, but the first day was a little bit smoky. You'll notice a slight bit of haze the rest of the trip, but really not too bad except for the first and last day was it. And probably the first day was the smokiest. So the first day, and our photos are covering some of my notes, but we do go over Vista Pass and Kubrock Pass. Vista Pass was on trail. That's the first 10, you cross over 10,000 feet. And then Kubrock was kind of off trail and you drop into Peak Lake below Knapsack Cove. That was our first day. Beautiful campsite. As you look at that lower right-hand photo, that notch is Knapsack Cove. That's where we're going on day 2. There are places to camp between the lake and there. And if you get to the lake and still have some energy, go further. It's going to make the next day that much easier. When we got there, we were pretty tired. You know, Brad was feeling the altitude, deservedly so. So we camped there, had a beautiful campsite. So day 1, pretty uneventful. So we got there, camped. The next day, you dive into what's the first of some of the off trails. So you can see there's a little bit of a path here and there, but there's not really a trail up over Knapsack Cove. There's a little bit of a path. A lot of hikers do this as a circuit off trail hike, like a 2 or 3 day backpack. As you can see, I wrote CDT alternate there. It is an alternate to the CDT versus the standard, the regular route. I did not do the alternate in 2014. Long story, won't go into. I would if I was doing the CDT again. I would, because the alternate, the Titcomb Basin and Knapsack Cove are just spectacular. The descent of the right-hand photo, that's the descent from the col. Pretty sketchy, loose dirt, loose rocks. I think we were both pretty comfortable. I was maybe a little bit more comfortable because as a mountaineer, I've just done it a bunch of times. But Brad's awesome in this thing. He just plods on and gets it done. But this was, photos never make it look as sketchy as it was. And the dirt there in the lower foreground. I mean, it was just like, you'd take a step and slide a little bit, take a step, slide a little bit. So it was kind of a controlled slide for a bit, but nothing too treacherous. And we made it. And as you can see, Knapsack Cove, I believe, is the highest at about 12,200 feet. And I think that might be the highest. One of the other ones is like 12,1. I think, I can't remember, maybe Indian Pass might have been 12,1, but Knapsack Cove, the very first high pass off trail, was, I think, the highest pass. Day two, Titcomb Basin, again, going northbound on the CDT would have been going the other way. But after you get over the pass, you hit a little bit of a trail. It's not a maintained trail, but it's a pretty good trail through there because there are a lot of hikers that do that little circuit, 2-3 day circuit through there. but just beautiful strolling through high alpine pine tundra for the rest of the day. So you've kind of done the hardest work of the day, just first thing going over knapsack coal and descending the other side. And then you're just strolling through Titcomb Basin. Just, I don't think my photos even come close to doing it justice. It's just an amazing, amazing place. I recommend that loop as just a backpack if you don't have time to do the whole thing. But then you turn up a side trail toward Indian Pass, and you start gaining elevation again. It was a decent path, somewhat of a path to the top of the pass, and then it'll get more serious again. But our second camp was right before we started up Indian Pass in what's called Indian Basin, Camp 2. The wind had finally died. It was super windy, I remember. The only windbreak was this rather large boulder. We both kind of got behind it the best we could. I can't remember, we might have drew straws to see who got the best spot. I don't remember, but fortunately it calmed down a little bit. This was one of those places, talking about bear bags, there was nowhere to hang. So our earth sacks were just properly tied shut, odor-proof bags in them, and about 100 yards away, just comfortably away from our camp. And we had no trouble the whole trip, fortunately, with critters. But the boulder came in handy, to cook behind, but then the wind died, which it did most nights. But you can see the weather. You see the clouds coming in. Nice sunset, but some clouds coming in. And day 3 is basically the crux of the 7 days, the hardest day, as you'll see. So these clouds started in, and we're like, no, we can't have bad weather on what's going to be the hardest day. But I will stay here in case I forget. If you're here and the weather does turn to where day 3 would be, at the very least, miserable, but at the worst, dangerous, there is an alternate. You can go back into Titcomb Basin, continue south on down the basin to, I think it's, let me look at my notes, I think it's Island Lake. Yes, an alternate via Island Lake from Titcomb Basin, and you can go up in other words, you can do a mostly on-trail alternate to bypass day 3. And that is a good one to know on your maps, because day 3, we're going to talk about, it's the hardest day. And if the weather's bad, I just wouldn't do it. I personally wouldn't do it in anything but decent weather, good weather. So day 3, this is your glacier. It's located between Indian Pass and Alpine Pass, both of which are over 11. Like I said, Indian might even been 12,000 again. Alpine was close to it. But there's this glacier between. In late September, you can see it's bare ice. En route, following the route, no crevasse problems. It's just really a low angle glacier, ice, very firm snow to bare ice. So this is where we use microspikes. This is the only time in 7 days for probably what amounted to an hour or 2 of travel that we used our microspikes, but we both agreed that later it's fine that we carried them for 7 days to only use them for less than 2 hours. Because without them, it would have been slick enough. The ice was dirty. You probably could have done it without them, but it would have been slip and sliding and not much fun. And to go around this glacier would have been probably most of a day of like scrambling moraines and talus, and it would have been a ridiculous day. So take the microspikes would be the moral of that story, even if this is the only time that you use them. It just made a pleasant hike across the glacier, what could have been super, super difficult, and what was already going to be a difficult day. So this is the start. I think on the lower left photo, I think that notch is probably Indian Pass. We were able to skirt around and not hit any of that steeper snow, and then get onto rocks, and then get down to the glacier, put our microspikes on, and then just cross the glacier. And then you go up over just kind of a rocky scree and talus climb up over Alpine Lakes Pass, which in this photo is now behind you. You're looking down from it, down toward Pass Lake. And this was the longest, hardest, most tedious part of the trip. You can see on this third day, we were supposed to do, I think 11 plus miles is what we kind of had planned. It was a hard fought 9 miles in 12 hours. So as you can see, the rocks, just no trail the rest of the day. We bypassed the snow. This is where if I'd had an ice axe, maybe in something more than microspikes, I'd have just went down the snow and stayed off the rocks. It just would have been faster, easier going. But just plodding down, talus, pretty stable talus, but of course, with any talus or scree, you've got to watch your footing. So if you look at the lake, this next screen, I'm going to blow up the lake a little. So this is that same lake, just a little bit more detail. The class 3 that Alan Dixon talked about is where I've labeled class 3 there. That rock band you have to climb across, and I'll talk about that in a second. But route finding, we weren't sure. So if you're the kind of person that wants to discover it for yourself, plug your ears for a minute or so, because this first rock band I'm going to talk about, we went down because we thought we were supposed to be at lake level. We went down, and right at that rock band, there was a very hard, it would have been class 5 rock climbing above the lake with a 30-pound pack on. So to fall would have been in freezing water, deeper over my head deep, freezing water with a pack on. Not something I wanted to do. So what we did is we went up that snow, which was pretty easy step kicking, and around the top of that rock band, and then kind of traversed more talus and scree back down to lake level to that rock band where it says class 3. When you get there, that's one of the cruxes of the route that you can't bypass. There's other stuff further on, class 4 stuff, that you can do another route, which we did. The class 3 here, again, if you don't want to hear this, cover your ears for a few seconds, a minute maybe. But if you want to discover it yourself. But down low, right above the water, there was a class 3, 2 or 3 scramble moves. Not real hard for, for an ex-climber like me, kind of fun. I just kind of scoped it out without my pack, and it's like, yeah, I can do that. But with the pack, again, if I do slip, lose my balance with a pack on my back, I'm going in the lake. So I explored, and about 100 feet up the slope, there was, hard to find, but I found a shelf that went up higher, further above the lake. But it had, and I will go to the next screen, at the far end of it, you had to scramble down some slabs like this, that, easy class 3, but you weren't exposed by the potential of falling into the lake if you messed up. So, and just fun scrambling. So day 3, type 2 fun. Most of you probably know what type 1, type 2, type 3 fun is. So type 1 fun, for those of you who never heard that, type 1 is you had a good time and you love talking about it. Type 2 is it was really hard, not much fun at times when you were doing it, but you love to talk about it. So that's what this was. There were times it was hard, boulder hopping, endless, rerouting, all this stuff. And it's like, oh gosh, this is barely fun. But now I look back and it's like, what an epic day in the mountains. So it was really type 2 fun. Type 3 fun, you don't want to go there. Type 3 fun is, it wasn't fun when you did it. It's never going to be fun when you talk about it. You probably don't want to talk about it. So you don't want to go to type 3 fun. So 12 hours, 9 days, that was us. We did this whole trip in 7 days. Alan Dixon and his friend Don did it in 5.5. So there's some strong fit guys. I feel like, we were moving pretty good to do it in 7 days. But lots of boulders, some route finding, third class scrambles. And then after that, the rest of that day was a lot of talus, a lot of, just easy class 2, just scrambling, but no trail for the rest of the day. We came up about a couple of miles short where we wanted to camp. But Brad did a lot of the planning for this. He had been to the Wind River before, never done this whole route, but done parts of it. Excellent planner. He very intelligently planned day 4 and day 5 to be somewhat easier days to be able to make up time if we didn't make good time on day 3. I hope that rambling sentence makes sense. So he knew that day 3 we might come up short. So day 4 and 5 were measurably easier days, still hard, but easier days. And we did. By the end of day 5, we made up that 2 miles easily. So day 4 was a lot of what you see here, just beautiful tundra, high alpine tundra. There was a pass, hay pass, not too hard, just your typical up over rocky, loose scree and stuff, but not, it's class 2. Just good hard hiking, scrambling. But I love this quote from Yogi Berra: "We're lost, but we're making good time." That came to my mind when I was in this area because it's a favorite quote of mine. And I had to put it in the slideshow because through this, it's easy, but there's no trail, and you got to make sure you hit the right pass and not the wrong pass. And a lot of it was just that little local stuff, avoiding bogs, not maybe going over them, especially the wrong pass, things like that. And just trying to pick the best way across this tundra. But just day 4 was just a pretty pleasant stroll in the scheme of things. And camp 4, camping on this trip was pretty easy to find. We found fairly good spots, as that camp 2 showed. Some of them were exposed, so you definitely want a shelter that you feel comfortable with in the wind and things. But this particular camp I put in because it turned out to be one of my favorites, but it was hard pressed. Day 4 was a longer day because it was fairly easy, but we made up some miles. But then at the end of the day, we were having trouble finding a flat spot, and it was windy and things. So we were having trouble finding, and we scrambled up on this little knoll above Lake 10,542 on the map. And we found a couple, some spots flat enough, and we camped there. The wind died, and it just was a beautiful spot. The next slide shows that lake. We were camped somewhere in the shadows on the other side of the lake there. So Lake 10,542. On the map, it has no name. And I love that. I love it when you're in wilderness that there's a lake this big and this beautiful that on most maps doesn't even have a name. Something about that just makes my heart sing. I love wilderness, obviously. I hope that's obvious. So Lake 10,542, it just didn't even have a name on the map, and it was just gorgeous. So the next morning, the water was so calm. Of course, the wind would start to blow later, but just a gorgeous morning at the start. This is how we started day 5. Normally, I would ask if we were in person, how many people are climbers, and people would raise their hands. But I'm assuming some of you are climbers. So we came up, kind of scrambling up above one of the alpine lakes, and we came to this Lake Donna, and then there's this peak, Pronghorn Peak, and we see this big wall. And I climbed for years, never really climbed any big walls like that. But I looked at that wall, and it's like, that is a vertical wall for several hundred, that's hundreds of feet. And it was just magnificent looking. And so I got out the map and I just figured out, okay, how high is that? I was guessing 600 or 700 feet. And to yourself, again, in person, I would ask for people to shout out guesses, but to yourself, just guess how high you think that is. And then how high that kind of sun facing wall is. And then I'm going to tell you, the summit of Pronghorn is 12,388. Lake Donna was at 11,000. So that is, if I did the math right, 1,388 feet high. That is one big wall. And it is in the middle of the wilderness, in the heart of the Wind River Range. So if you're a climber, go prepared to be remote. Go for it. I would imagine, I've never really investigated to see if it's been climbed. I'm sure it has, because it's just such a beautiful peak, and there appears to be some good crack lines and stuff on it. So anyway, that was amazing. I myself was guessing 600, maybe 700 feet, and I pulled that up, and it's like, no way, 1,300 feet. That's amazing. So just some of the amazing formations and scenery of the Wind River Range. And after that, we did go over, I think right after that, we were going over, might have been Bonneville Pass, 11,000, again, 11,000 something foot pass, nothing too hard off trail, of course, as 6 of the 9 passes are. But I don't remember it being anything terribly difficult, but just to slog up and over the pass. But just through this section, day 4, day 5, part of day 6, just a lot of alpine tundra strolling, and just beautiful. You don't need a trail. You just walk. And now it's a good idea environmentally to spread out. Try not to create a trail, but just spread out and just enjoy, like Shipton said in that early quote, just moving through the mountains. Gosh, makes my heart sing. So you go over, it's not named on the map. I think we were calling it Bonneville Raid Pass. There's Mount Bonneville on one side of the pass and Raid Peak on the other side. And there's a pass between them. That's over 11,000 feet. We climbed up and over that. Had to figure out the route. The little bit of beta we had the description wasn't very good. So there's some route finding, but we finally found the pass. You don't really see the pass until you kind of come around the corner, but we got over the pass and we dropped into East Fork Valley on day 6. And I titled the slide "The Throne Room of the Mountain Gods," and I put it in quotes because I kind of plagiarizing that name, so I will give credit. That's the name of a book that I read decades ago when I was first getting into mountaineering. It's the story of the first American K2 Karakoram expedition from decades ago. And that was the name of the book. And I just thought, coming down, it just popped into my head, this East Fork Valley, you're walking down this valley with just one wall after another, one peak after another. And it just made me think of that title. So that's why I titled it that. Just, again, a kind of a tundra walk. Looks like some easier climbing. Certainly, I didn't measure these, but those walls are several hundred feet high, but a lot of them lower angles. So there's probably some good moderate stuff in there, and still fairly far into the range, but a little less remote, as you'll see on the next slide. We got to our first official maintained trail on day 6. After day 1, there were no maintained official trails until day 6. So the first trail sign in 5 days was laying on the ground, but it was still a sign. And so I thought of that John Muir quote, when we saw a trail for the first time. Of all the paths you take, make sure a few of them are dirt. It was actually kind of nice to just cruise on trail for a while. So we were cruising down the trail. And at this point, Brad was acclimatized and he's quite a bit younger than I. For full disclosure, was 60 at the time. I'll be 63 this summer. He, I think, was late 30s, maybe 40 by now. So quite a bit younger. He's acclimatized. So when we hit the trail, I was having to hustle to keep up with him at this point, but it was nice to be on trail. And then you turn up by, I think it's Shadow Lake, and then you end up at the last camp for us was Texas Lake, I think it's what it's called, just before you go up Texas Pass, which is the last off-trail pass. So we camped here, kind of hoping, because there was a trail kind of that we had hiked up to get here, and then had turned off of another trail that would take you to Big Sandy. And we were kind of holding out maybe that Alan would have met us here, but we looked out for him for the longest time and he didn't make it. He ends up making it, meeting us the next day, which was good also. It was great to see him, but it was also good because he was our ride back to civilization. So it was good on both counts. But just a beautiful last campsite, just alpine at its best. So we camped there, and then the next morning, I'll go back there. You can see it's just another typical off-trail pass in the Wind River, at least the ones that go, relatively easy and safely. It's just a scree and talus slope. There's a little bit of a climber's path because, again, this does get some people that come over it from the other side. So this gives you a little taste. I'm looking down at Brad back. We were camped down kind of in the upper middle there in that kind of meadowy area. Just beautiful alpine area. So just a slog up to Texas Pass, and then you top the pass and you're rewarded with your first view of the Cirque of the Towers. For you climbers out there, you probably might recognize the name Cirque of the Towers. It's a famous area it's the area that most people know when they hear about Wind River Range. Just, it's a day's walk from the trailhead on trail for the most part to get to these climbs. Pingora Peak on the right, that kind of sunlit face, I think it's the northeast face. For you climbers, the hardest pitch is 5.8, which I think you can bypass at 5.6. But that climb, northeast face, for those of you who have heard of the book by Alan Steck and Steve Roper called 50 Classic Climbs in North America, that climb is one of the 50s. So it's their opinion, of course, but they wrote this classic book years and years ago called 50 Classic Climbs in North America. So this book is a compilation of the 50 climbs in their mind that they think are the 50 classic climbs. So to put it in perspective, that climb they consider, that peak and climb they consider to be one of the 50 classic climbs in North America. That says a lot. So anyway, when I used to be a climber, I had designs on going to climb it. Never did. Guess I still could, but I'm not really a climber anymore. So now I'll just enjoy it for just how incredibly beautiful it is. War Bonnet, that whole area, Cirque of the Towers, is just amazingly beautiful. So you drop down to, I think it's Lost Lake, up over another pass on trail, the last pass that I'm totally drawing a blank on, but it's on trail, still over 10,000 feet. It might even be 11,000 feet. And then you drop down into the big sandy drainage, big sandy, I guess, creek and lakes. And that was kind of the end of the journey. You can see on the lower left, Alan did join us. So my good friend joined us. Everybody was safe and sound. And we had a ride back to Pinedale, which was cool too. So yeah, just an amazing trip. Brad was an awesome companion. I would never be one to recommend doing something so hard with someone that you only met the night before. That could be an adventure in itself, but I can say that Brad was just an awesome. We did the Sierra last year, did a similar type trip in the Sierra last year. So we have annual trips now. So I think we got along pretty well. Different personalities that just get along well in the mountains, or at least enough. He's invited me on more trips. So, and I would certainly invite him. And Alan is hoping to join us this year in the Wind River. So cross your fingers. We all get to do a trip together. I leave the end here with this. This is one of my favorite quotes. Again, I've had this quote for, gosh, I don't know, 30 years. I think again of my many adventures, my fears, the small ones that seem so big, for all the vital things I had to get and to reach. And yet there is one great thing, the only thing, to see the great day that dawns and the light that fills the world. I love that quote. Anyway, so I'll end with that. As you can see, just the sunrises. This is, right after sunrise, just amazing light. They call the Sierra the range of light. Well, the Wind River Range, in my mind, it's a smaller scale, but it rivals the Sierra. It's an amazing mountain range. So I hope all of you, whether you do the high route or not, get to the Wind River Range. So I think this is my last slide. So this is all that information. Some of it was all this was on earlier slides. I'll leave this up as long as we need, if you need to write any of this down. The only thing that's on here that wasn't on previous slides is kind of on the far left, about halfway down. That's my name's Gary, of course, that's my Mountain Shop email. So if I don't answer questions here, don't get time to answer questions, or something comes up, or just anything to do with ultralight backpacking. If you live here in Portland, please come to the shop. I'd love to talk to people in person. We're getting back to normal with this pandemic thing, and it's so nice for everybody. But if you don't live here, or it's not convenient, or for whatever reason, please email me questions, comments. I love to hear feedback, good and bad. Let me know what I can do better if I ever do this presentation again. But yeah, just Gary@mountainshop.net. Just contact me there. And I'm not the world's fastest with email, but I promise I'll do the best to get back to you. So that is it for me. Thank you all. Thank you, Jess. I see you're back on my screen now. This was my first webinar, and Jess will attest. I was a little bit nervous about it, so I hope it went well. Like when I do talks in person, as soon as I start, I get comfortable. So I hope that came across. But she helped set my mind at ease with all this technical stuff. So thank you, Jess, and thanks for everybody for attending.
You did great, Gary.
Thank you.
We have a couple more questions that came through. If you are still up for answering a couple things.
Yeah, I went a little longer than I planned, but I'm here. Ask away.
All right. So Patty is curious if you could talk more about the concerns over the lightweight shelter, if you were concerned about wind or cold.
Okay. Well, certainly, you know, I'm an ultralight backpacker, lightweight through hiker. I've spent a lot of time in the ultralight shelters, so I've learned their ins and outs, especially the ones that I've used. So I think experience with them come into play. Gosh, I'm not sure how best to answer that other than hopefully I said before, I meant to just go as light as you can, but use a shelter that you're comfortable with. Now, for example, Alan Dixon and his friend Don, they did the same trip in 5.5 days, and they used a Dyneema tarp, just a flat tarp. They were comfortable with that. That would be pushing it a little bit for me, because tarps aren't as good as the shelters I even used, I think, in high winds and stuff. But that was their comfort level, and they're good at setting them up, obviously. And so they felt comfortable that they would be okay, and they were. I would say carry a shelter that you feel comfortable and experienced with bad weather and rain, and test it. We certainly, well, this year is pretty dry. We certainly get rain here in the Northwest. So if you're like me and you've lived here for years, you know, most of us should have experience camping in the rain. But yeah, be familiar with your shelter, whatever it is, in the wind. You know, take it up on Mount Hood between now and your trip. Use it in the wind. You know, find some safe places, but some places, and try some things out in a relatively safe location. But you know, everything's a risk, right? So risk, I think, is just you find your comfort level and you mitigate the risk. I'm not a risk taker. And all my climbing buddies and all that know that I'm not overtly a risk taker, but I will take risks that I feel comfortable with. And I'm comfortable with those ultralight shelters in these areas. So that's my comfort level. I don't know if that's answering your question. That's a tough one, but mainly use the shelter, even if it's heavier. If that's what you need to feel safe and comfortable, take it. Cut weight somewhere else if you can, you know, that you're comfortable with. But yeah, and just look for as protected areas as you can. But knowing on a route like this, there are going to be some camps that there's just not much protection. So you just have to take extra stakes. I carried more stakes than I usually do, so I could anchor my tents a little better. Piled rocks on top of them to make sure, you know, they held, things like that. I hope that helps.
All right, we got another one. Do you think a rain skirt will be fine over rain pants for this trip?
Excellent question. If you may have noticed in my overall gear photo, I had rain pants on this one. I'm going back this year and I will probably take a rain skirt. I love my rain skirt. I have a homemade seal nylon rain skirt that a friend made me. It weighs just over 2 ounces versus the lightest weight rain pants that I've ever had were like 5+. So that's, it's some weight savings. I think if you're going in August and you're experienced with the rain skirt, I'm going to use a rain skirt. In September, I think I took full lightweight rain pants because I knew that in September it had potential to be colder and a higher chance of snow and things like that. It would have been horrible to walk out in several inches of snow, but at least I know I would have been a little bit warmer in rain pants. So that, from my experience, was my decision to take rain pants in September. In August, even though it can still snow, it can be cold, it can blow rain sideways. I've done enough use with my skirt now that I'm comfortable knowing what I can do in that. And I've hiked in some pretty raw, cold, rainy days in my skirt and been fine. So if you're experienced with that, there's some weight savings.
All right. Michael is curious if there is an accessible campsite by car at high elevation to sleep at for acclimatization nearby.
Such a tough word. Well, we slept at the trailhead at Green Lakes. There's a little campground there. We got a campsite and set up there. I think I cowboy camped there because the weather was good. And I want to say it certainly was over 8,000 feet. So I know you can, we did, there's a little campground there. So we split the campground and stayed there. There probably are other ones. I mean, it's Elk Park, I think. I always forget. It's Elk something is the name of the trailhead nearest Pinedale. Pinedale is the town on the west side that's kind of in similar distant from each of the trailheads. So that's like your takeoff point. You could drive to that trailhead. It's a huge trailhead. There's 100 cars at that trailhead. I have a small van now. So when I go to meet my friends, we're starting from that trailhead this year and going to do a loop from there. I'm probably going to sleep in my van at that trailhead. I don't know. I don't remember seeing any tents there or anything. I honestly don't know if you can tent camp at that trailhead. That might be something that you just check with the ranger district, which I should know. That's easy enough to figure out. But you might check with that. But we did at Green River stay there, and it was at least 8,000 feet. And we did that to help my friends have at least one night as high as we could and be ready to go first thing the next morning.
Next question. During your time there, do you think long pants and shirt are required for bugs? Or did you think a small container of bug spray would suffice? How are the mosquitoes?
Well, in September, none. And I'm thinking the trip we do, our trip this year, I think starts the 25th of August. So basically the end of August. I'm not expecting there to be many bugs. I sometimes wear long pants and a long shirt for sun. I will probably wear like a sun hoodie instead of a nylon bug-proof shirt in August. From my experience being there on the CDT and from what I've heard otherwise, I would say if you're there before the middle of August or earlier, I would plan on bugs. I sometimes, if I'm expecting a lot of bugs, will take bug juice, but I usually depend on clothing, take a head net, some kind of bug proof shirt, and some long pants that you tested and are bug proof. And I usually will wear a wide brim hat in those situations because then that keeps the bug net off my face and neck. I was just up on Silver Star over in Washington Tuesday and Wednesday, and the bugs here are coming out. And so that's kind of the combination that I had. Prepare for bugs mid-August and earlier. So I would take long pants. And it's not brutally hot there because you're so high. So long pants are good for sun too. I don't like to live in a lot of sunscreen. I love hiking in shorts, but some nice, comfortable long pants can protect you from sun too.
All right. Lisa is looking for some recommendations on routes in the Northwest to get started, to help learn like off-trail route finding.
Okay. Well, Mount Hood's in our backyard. It's not very melted out up high, so it's going to be a while. It's going to be buggy in July, early July. So all good practice, right? Um, as a trail hike, the Timberline Trail is a good training hike. I would wait this year at least until late July because I think the stream crossings are going to be bad. But from the Timberline Trail around Mount Hood, like last year over on the north side, I did some off-trail stuff. Just, I left Cloud Cap, went counterclockwise a half a day, and then just struck off up the mountain, just kind of that alpine tundra, scrambling, places like that. Just to get used to being off trail and stuff. So Mount Hood, I still have not completed it for one reason or another, but the route around Mount Adams, for a circuit hike around Mount Adams, there's a section of that's off trail and route finding and stuff would be good. The Lewitt Trail around St. Helens is a trail, but on the crater side, you do lose that trail some, so you have to route find. At the very least, you're on loose rock and pumice and all that. So, that's all good practice just to get your body used to like not walking down a sidewalk kind of thing. But those are the places local. I mean, down in the Sisters, any of the volcanoes, once you get up above tree line, especially later, after the snow has melted enough, or even if there is snow, take your ice axe and your spikes or your crampons and practice that. But I'd say local Mount Hood, there's any number of places. Go up above Ramona Falls, up toward Yoakum Ridge. You can go up there and even do an overnighter. I've camped up there and there's snow and scree and you can scramble around up there. So yeah, I hope that most of my off-trail practice has been in the Sierra and some in the Wind River Range and all that. But to get ready for those those are the places I would try, especially Mount Hood, as it becomes more accessible.
A few more questions. What hours during the day did you hike? Like, did you start at a certain time and try to end by a certain time, or?
If I remember, I'm an early riser when I'm on trail. Brad kind of was, but I was usually up first. But remember, he wasn't firing a stove. So I would usually get up at first light. And, in September, I don't remember exactly what time that was. But basically, I would get up at first light, get the food bags, fire up my stove. I most days will have a hot breakfast, but I certainly will have hot coffee. So I'd have my breakfast and start just leisurely packing, and then I'd hear him rummaging after that. So I was probably up at first light, and he was probably up by sunrise. And because he wasn't cooking, within 45 minutes to an hour of me getting up, we were ready to hit the trail. So I tend to like to hit the trail early. I love the morning when I'm on trail. In August or anytime like that, thunderstorms and things are more likely to come up in the afternoon, though they can hit at any time in the Wind River. They're more likely, kind of like the Sierra, they're more likely later in the day. So with an early start, you get further just in case that happens. We got very lucky with the weather. That I alluded to that one night of potential weather, and I never finished the story. It didn't come. The next day was beautiful. So we literally had beautiful weather for 7 days, and which is extraordinary in the Wind River. Most people that I've talked to who have done this route have gotten bad weather. Some have gotten snowed on. One party I talked to one year literally got rained on every day. So it can be an inhospitable mountain range. But yeah, does that answer the question? I hope, or yeah.
I think so.
Yeah. But yeah, but as far as how long, we just, we were trying to average 11 miles a day. So we were usually, our longest day was 12 hours. I think most of our days were at least 10 to 11 to do that 11, 12, 13 miles a day. For us, I'm older and stuff, but we're not speed demons, but we're not slow. But especially off trail, mile and a quarter, mile and a half an hour, that's pretty good speed. So maybe judge that speed. What time do I need it to get up to do 10, 12 miles today? Yeah.
How hard would you say the route finding is in the, let's see, I think this is about the Sierra High route.
For the Sierra High route?
I think so.
The Sierra High route wasn't hard. Andrew Skirka had good information, good maps. Neither one are exceptionally hard if you're experienced at route finding. Honestly, especially in the Wind River, we had a GPX route that Brad had created. So, as long as the phone is working, you can follow that. Know how to use a map and compass. I can never say that enough. I need to practice more myself. But in general, it was just a matter of what I call local route finding, finding your way around this rock band on a descent or a climb. Going up the passes was pretty easy. You can see the pass, you just pick your route. Going down, sometimes you couldn't tell if you were descending to a rock band that you couldn't get down. So there was some route finding around cliff bands and stuff. So that's just kind of looking at your maps and trying to stay on the route and just knowing that you're going to make mistakes and have to reroute, maybe climb back up, go around, things like that. So that local route finding was probably the hardest, especially descending some of the passes because you couldn't see cliffs quite as easy. And wasn't a lot of that. As far as the big route finding, just making sure you hit the right pass. There's a lot of passes, and I don't remember that being very hard. Using the phone app, using Gaia, using your maps, there's good descriptions of the route on Alan Dixon's website. Between all those, if you've got some experience with off trail and route finding, some basic understanding, I didn't find it to be that difficult. Now, I had a partner who had done part of it before. That always helps. He's like, nope, it's that pass, I'm sure, because I've done that one before. So that helps. But I don't think the route finding is very difficult. You just have to pay attention that you're using your resources to go to the right pass, and then just picking and choosing the right, usually descent lines from the pass, so you don't go over anything too hard. You don't want to make it harder than it already is. So
Favorite trail food?
favorite. Well, I'm vegan. I've been vegetarian for 20 years. I've been vegan for a year and a half, almost 2 years. I make a lot of my own meals. My favorite meal is bean and rice burritos. If I have it, I'll put some vegan cheese on there and, spice it up and things like that. I always have tortillas. I love bread, probably eat too much wheat, but I always have tortillas. Tortillas have become like my trail bread because I use them. I put everything on them. I put peanut butter, trail butter. I put Fritos on them. I put everything on tortillas. But beans and rice, I have some, just some easy cook. I'm thinking about experimenting with no cook, but I'm a backpacker at heart. All those climbing things I did and all that, through hiking. There's a lot of long distance through hikers who have never backpacked. They've only through hiked long distance hiking. I'm a backpacker at heart, so I like a hot meal and a hot breakfast. And like a lot of Oregonians and Portlanders, I can't function without coffee in the morning. I think I speak for a lot of us. To those of you who don't need coffee, you're my hero, because I wish I didn't, but I do. So in the morning, I will have anything from cold granola that I'll add some stuff, some nuts, some dried berries and fruit to, for calories and nutrition. Coconut milk powder instead of dairy, because I'm vegan again. I have a couscous breakfast that I like better than oatmeal. The classic oatmeal. It's good. It's nutritious. You can add nuts and all kinds of nutrition to it. I don't know. I think like a lot of people, I've had so much oatmeal as a backpacker. I'm a little tired of it, but I'll still do it once in a while. But there's a couscous. I'll sometimes substitute couscous for oats and put some of the same other ingredients. And it's just, I like that one. So I hope this is helping, but just quick stuff. I used to do a lot of the north side meals, but there are a couple of those that are plant-based that I'm playing with, but just quick, easy. I don't want to have to simmer stuff. If it needs to cook a little bit, that's going to be in my cozy. I'm not going to use fuel for anything but boiling. And that's just me. If you want to cook elaborate meals, great. And please invite me on your trip and feed me. That'd be awesome. But I want to go lighter. And I want to carry less fuel. So I'll boil water and go from there. And, sometimes meals are a little bit crunchy because, they needed to simmer and I didn't simmer them. So does that help? But I make a lot of my own. There are some freeze dried for me as vegan. Backpackers Pantry. We sell a lot of different meals here at the store. So come in, we have a great selection right now of freeze-dried meals. And I do use some of them. Some of my favorites on those are the Backpackers Pantry because they have several vegan options. And some of them are large enough that I will repackage them with a vacuum packer. So like one of my favorites is Cuban rice and beans. From Backpackers Pantry, I can split that into 2 meals with my vacuum packer, add tortillas, maybe some vegan cheese, makes great burritos. That's another, I love burritos, if I didn't mention that already, and I'm sure I did. I hope that helps. I don't know if you want me being your dietitian, but I'm vegan, but that doesn't mean I'm the healthiest vegan on earth. I eat a lot of junk food. I love Fritos. Which is hard when you're trying to pack 8 days of food into a bear can or a Ursack. Fritos take a lot of space, but they're high calorie and stuff. So I love dark chocolate. There's some dark chocolate that's vegan. I eat a lot of bars. I eat a lot of Cliff bars. I eat a lot of Lara bars, any vegan bars, because I like to snack on bars as I'm hiking. I don't like to have to stop and get in my pack for all my food. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, I think we're through the questions. So thank you so much for taking your night to tell us all about your ultralight tips. I think there was a lot of like insider information in there. The like cozy thing, super helpful.
Good.
The like,
I hope so.
yeah,
Yeah, it's fun for me. I hope it comes across for me that it's fun because it is. I love sharing these experiences and stuff.
Yeah,
and people.
It was great to see you talk about it. You can just feel your love for the place and for backpacking and hiking in general. So thank you so much for sharing it. You got a ton of kudos from people on the call. I'll share them with you, Gary. Just lots of people writing in the chat. Thank you so much for your knowledge and that you did a great job with technology. So way to go.
Well, thanks to you for that.
Yeah, but thanks everyone for joining us. So unfortunately, the call just abruptly is going to hang up, but we really appreciate you tuning in. Stop by the shop anytime. Gary is here every day except Tuesdays and Wednesdays. So if you want to pick his brain more, feel free to come in. His email is also in the chat, so you can email him directly if you're interested in getting in touch. But thanks so much. We'll see you around. Bye.